If you had driven down Linden Street on any evening that autumn, you would have noticed it without quite knowing why. It was one of those old Midwestern streets where the houses sit close and friendly, where the porches face each other across narrow front yards, and where, as the light goes blue and then grey, the lamps come on one by one, a soft yellow glow behind every screen door. All of them but one. Right in the middle of the block, in a tidy white house with green shutters and a porch swing that never moved, the light stayed off. Every night. The darkest porch on a street of warm ones. Settle in for tonight's story, and let it move at that same slow evening pace. There is no shouting in it, no villain, no courtroom, no big scene where somebody finally gets what they had coming. It is a gentler kind of story than that. It is about an old man named Robert, and the light he stopped turning on, and the ordinary, unhurried way a whole street decided, without ever holding a meeting about it, to bring one of its own back into the world. Let your breathing slow down to match it. You have nowhere to be for a while. Robert Hale was 70 years old, and he had lived in that white house for nearly 40 of those years. He had bought it as a young man with his young wife, Margaret, back when the linden trees along the curb were no taller than he was, and the two of them had grown old there together, the way the trees had grown tall, slowly and without noticing. He had taught high school woodshop for 4 decades, 3 towns worth of teenagers passing through his classroom, and he still ran into some of them, grey at the temples now themselves, who would say, "Mr. Hale, you taught me to cut a straight line." And he never quite knew what to say back except, "Thank you." Margaret had died the spring before this story starts. It had been cancer, and it had been quick in the end. And Robert had held her hand in a room that smelled of antiseptic and cut flowers. And then he had come home to a house that was exactly the same and completely different. That was the thing nobody warns you about, he thought. The house does not change. The coffee cups are where she left them. Her reading glasses are still folded on the arm of the chair. The whole world keeps its shape, and only the center of it is gone, so that you walk around all day bumping into the outline of a person who isn't there. He had gotten through the first months the way people do, on the fuel of casseroles and cards, and the phone calls that come thick right after, and then thin out. His son David called every Sunday from Seattle, where he had a good job and a wife and 2 children Robert saw once a year if he was lucky. David had offered, more than once, to fly him out, to help him sell the house and move west, closer. And every time Robert said the same thing. "This is where your mother is. I'm not leaving her." And David, who was a good son and a busy man with a life 3 time zones away, would sigh and say, "All right, Dad," and they would both let it go. So Robert stayed, and Robert was alone, and here is the part that is easy to miss from the outside. He had not always been the quiet man on the block. He had simply been married to the woman who did all the knowing of people. Margaret was the one who learned the neighbors' names and their kids' names and their dogs' names. Margaret baked the banana bread that showed up on doorsteps. Margaret organized the street's 4th of July every single year, dragging the long folding tables out of the Hales' garage and lining them up down the middle of the road. Robert had built those tables, in fact, in his own shop years ago. But it was Margaret who filled them. When she was gone, all of that went quiet with her. The old neighbors who had known Robert as half of a couple had themselves moved away or passed on or gone into the kind of assisted living place where the parking lot is always half empty. The street had turned over, the way streets do, into young families Robert had never really met. To them, he was just the older man in the white house who didn't wave. And Robert, who had never had to introduce himself to anyone in his life because Margaret always did it first, found that he no longer remembered how. So he didn't. He let the days close over him like water. And the porch light. You should know about the porch light because it matters more than anything else in this story. For all the years they lived there, Margaret had left the porch light on every single night, She did it when David was a teenager, staying out too late, so he'd never come home to a dark house. She kept doing it long after he'd grown and gone, for the paperboy, for the neighbors walking dogs, for no reason at all, except the one she gave whenever Robert asked why she bothered. "Nobody on Linden Street should ever have to walk up to a dark house," she said. "It costs us a penny, and it tells the whole world somebody's home." After she died, Robert stopped turning it on. He didn't decide to, exactly. The first night he simply forgot, and the second night he noticed he'd forgotten and thought, "What does it matter? Nobody's coming." And the third night, not turning it on had become the new way of things. The dark porch was just another shape his grief had taken. One more small surrender he wasn't even aware he was making. He couldn't have told you it was off. That's how it is with the heaviest things sometimes. You stop seeing them because you're carrying them. I'll tell you now, so you can rest easy through the sad middle of this, that it does not end in the dark. If you had told Robert, that grey November, that within a year his would be the first porch light lit on the whole of Linden Street, the one the others waited for and followed, he would have looked at you like you had the wrong house and the wrong man. But that is exactly what happened, and it started, as the best things often do, with something small and loud moving in next door. The house to the left of Robert's had sat empty most of that year, a foreclosure with a lockbox on the door and grass that the city eventually sent someone to cut. So when the moving truck pulled up on a cold Saturday in November, brakes hissing, Robert noticed the way you notice weather. He stood a little back from his front window, where he could see without being seen, and he watched a young couple and a great deal of furniture spill out into the yard next door. There was a man, tall and cheerful, directing boxes. There was a woman with dark hair pulled back, a baby of maybe 1 on her hip, and a little girl, 6 or so, in a purple coat, running circles on the frozen grass with her arms out like an aeroplane. They were loud. That was Robert's first and only thought about the Reyes family that day. The little girl shrieked with the pure delight of a child who has a whole new yard to conquer, and the baby wailed when he was set down, and the young father called out cheerful nonsense as he carried a couch, and Robert let the curtain fall back and went to the kitchen to make himself a single cup of coffee and did not think about them again. He had gotten good, that year, at not thinking about things. It was the one skill his grief had taught him, and he'd practiced it until it was nearly perfect. But you cannot unlive next to a family. Not on a street like Linden, where the houses lean toward each other. Over the next weeks, the Reyes family soaked into the edges of Robert's careful quiet, whether he wanted them to or not. He learned the young mother's name was Nora because her husband, Josh, called it across the yard 100 times a day. He learned the little girl in the purple coat was named Lily because Lily announced herself loudly to the entire street, to the mail carrier, to a squirrel, to Robert himself one afternoon when he was carrying in his trash cans. "Hi," she said, planting herself at the property line. "I'm Lily. We live here now. That's my house." Robert nodded at her. He didn't mean to be unkind. He just no longer had the machinery for it, the small, easy words that other people seem to keep in their pockets. He said, "That's a nice house," in a voice rusty from disuse, and he carried his trash cans up the drive and went inside. And behind him, he heard the little girl say, to no one, to the cold afternoon, "That man doesn't talk very much." And she was right, and it should not have stung, and somehow it did, a small splinter he couldn't find to pull out. A few days later, there was a knock. Robert opened the door to find Nora Reyes on his porch with a plate covered in foil, the baby once again on her hip, and a smile that was trying very hard. "We just wanted to say hi properly," she said. "We're the Reyes family. We're right next door, and I made too many of these, so—" She held out the plate. Robert took it. It was warm through the foil, and the warmth traveled up his arms and landed somewhere in his chest that he had kept shut for months, and it frightened him a little. That warmth, the way a hand held too close to your face when you've been cold a long time, can almost hurt. He said thank you. He said it too quietly, and he shut the door too soon, and he stood in his hallway holding a plate of another woman's cookies and felt, for reasons he could not have explained, close to tears. He ate 2 of them standing at the counter. They were good. That night he washed the plate carefully, dried it, and set it by the door to return, and then he did not return it for 11 days. Because to return it he would have to knock, and to knock he would have to think of something to say, and he had nothing. He had a house full of nothing, and so the clean plate sat by his door and reproached him every time he passed it. This is the part of the story I want you to sit with for a moment, because it is the truest part, and it is the part that so many people know from the inside and never say out loud. Robert was not a bitter man or a cold one. He was a man who had loved someone for 50 years and then lost her, and who had discovered that grief, past a certain point, stops looking like sadness and starts looking like a kind of paralysis. Every small kindness the world offered him felt like a door he did not have the strength to walk through. It was easier to stay in the dark hallway. It asked nothing of him. And the terrible thing about the easy path is how quickly it becomes the only one you can find. His days had a shape, if you could call it that. He woke early, out of habit, on his side of a bed that was too wide now. He made coffee in the machine that still, out of its own habit, was set to brew a full pot, and he poured 1 cup and let the rest go cold and dumped it out at noon. He still took 2 cups down from the cabinet some mornings before he caught himself, and putting the second one back was the small daily wound he never got used to. He ate lunch standing up. He watched the afternoon news he didn't listen to. He ate his dinner from a plastic tray, and he went to bed while it was still early, because being asleep was the closest thing to being at peace that he could still manage. He shopped once a week at the grocery on the county road, and even that had become a small ordeal of loneliness. He bought single-serving everything, tiny cans and half loaves and the sad little frozen meals for one, and he pushed his cart through the bright aisles among families and couples arguing pleasantly about pasta sauce, and he felt like a ghost drifting through a house that used to be his. One afternoon, the young man at the register, a kid of maybe 17 with an easy grin, scanned his few items and said, "How you doing today, sir?" And Robert realized, standing there with his debit card, that it was the most anyone had said to him in 4 days. "Fine," he said, "thank you." And he meant the thank you more than the boy could possibly have known. Next door, meanwhile, life went on at full volume, and some of it began, slowly, to leak over the fence. Lily Reyes was a determined child, and she had decided, in the mysterious way of 6-year-olds, that the quiet man next door was her particular project. She waved at him every single time she saw him, whether he waved back or not, which he mostly did not. She left things on the low wall between the yards, a smooth rock, a maple leaf she thought was especially good, a drawing once of a cat that may have been a dog. Robert found them and didn't know what to do with them, and couldn't quite throw them away either, so they collected on his kitchen windowsill, a small, growing pile of a child's attention that he had done nothing to earn. The first drawing that undid him a little came taped to his mailbox in early December. It was Lily's work, unmistakably, done in heavy crayon on a torn piece of construction paper. It showed 2 houses side by side. One was full of stick figures, a tall one and a shorter one, and 2 little ones, and, off to the side, a scribble that had 4 legs and was probably a dog they didn't have yet. The other house had 1 figure in it, a tall man with a downturned mouth and a fringe of grey crayon hair standing alone in a doorway. Underneath, in the careful, wobbling letters of a kid who has just learned them, it said, "The man next door." Robert stood at his mailbox in the cold, with that piece of paper in his hand for a long time. He did not throw it away. He took it inside, and, after standing in the kitchen not knowing what to do with himself, he put it on the refrigerator, under a magnet shaped like a strawberry that Margaret had bought at a farm stand 100 years ago. It was the first new thing to go on that refrigerator in over a year. He looked at it while he ate his dinner from its plastic tray, the lonely little crayon man in his crayon doorway, and he thought, that's not how I want to be seen. And then he thought, but that's exactly how I am. And the two thoughts sat with him all evening, like guests he couldn't ask to leave. Now I have to tell you about the hardest night. And then I promise the light starts coming back, and it doesn't leave again. The 20th of December was Robert and Margaret's wedding anniversary. They had married 3 days before Christmas in a small church with a borrowed sound system 50 years before, and every anniversary since they had done the same simple thing. A pot roast Margaret made in her mother's heavy blue casserole dish, a bottle of the cheap sweet wine they'd never grown out of, and the two of them at the kitchen table with the good candles lit. That first year without her, the 20th of December landed on a Tuesday, and Robert had known it was coming the way you know a storm is coming, in your joints, for days. David had planned to fly out for it. That was the plan, made warmly back in October, that David and maybe the kids would come for the anniversary and stay through Christmas so that Dad wouldn't be alone for the first hard holidays. But December is December, and life is life. One of the grandchildren came down with strep, and then the other, and there were fevers and a cancelled flight and a rebooking fee. And David called on the 18th, miserable with guilt, to say, "Dad, I'm so sorry, we just can't. Not with both of them sick. I'll come in the spring, I promise. I'll come when it's warm." And Robert, who would not have dreamed of making his son feel worse, said, "Of course, don't be silly, the kids come first. That's how it should be." And he meant it. And he hung up the phone and stood in his kitchen and understood that he was going to spend his 50th anniversary alone. He tried, that night, to do the thing they'd always done. He got Margaret's blue casserole dish down from the high shelf, and he stood holding it, and he understood he did not know how to make the pot roast, had never once made it in 50 years, and that the recipe lived in a head that was gone. He put the dish back. He didn't light the candles. He sat at the kitchen table in the dark with a glass of the cheap sweet wine he'd bought out of habit, and across from him was Margaret's empty chair. And above the refrigerator's soft hum, the house was so quiet he could hear the clock in the hall. He did not cry, exactly. He had gone somewhere past crying. He just sat in the dark, on the darkest porch's dark kitchen, on the night that had been the happiest night of his year for half a century, and he was as alone as a person can be. And here is the small thing that happened, the kind of thing that seems like nothing and turns out to be everything. Sometime after 8, there was a soft knock, not at the front door, but at the side door, the kitchen door that opened toward the Reyes' yard. When Robert opened it, cold air rushing in, there was no one there. But on the step, in the porch dark, sat Margaret's cookie plate, the one he'd never returned, and it was full again, warm again, foil over the top. And leaning against it was another of Lily's drawings. This one showed his house, the white house with the green shutters, and above the door, drawn in yellow crayon pressed so hard it had almost torn the paper, was a great blazing porch light with lines coming off it like the sun. And underneath, the wobbling letters, "You forgot to turn it on." Robert stood in the open doorway, with the cold pouring past him, and looked at that drawing for a long, long time. You forgot to turn it on. A 6-year-old had looked at his house every night and seen, more clearly than he had, the one thing that was wrong with it. Nobody on Linden Street should ever have to walk up to a dark house, Margaret used to say. And he had been coming home to one every night. And worse, he had been making the whole street walk past one. A dark hole in the row of warm windows, a small nightly announcement that here lived someone who had given up. He looked at the little painted sun over his crayon door. Then he reached out, without quite deciding to, and flipped the switch by the kitchen door, and through the window he watched the porch light come on for the first time in over a year, throwing a soft yellow square onto the frozen grass. It wasn't much. It was everything. He left it on all night. That was the crack in the wall. It was small, and it did not fix him, and the next morning he was still a grieving old man in a too-quiet house. But something had shifted, the way a season shifts before you can point to the day. He returned the plate the next afternoon. He knocked on the Reyes' door, and when Nora answered, he held it out, and, in his rusty voice, he managed more than one sentence. "Thank you for the cookies," he said. "And tell Lily, tell her the drawings are good. She's a real artist. Tell her I put them up." Nora's face did something complicated and warm, and she said, "She'll be so happy, Mr. Hale. She talks about you all the time." And from somewhere inside the house, a small voice shrieked, "Is that the man next door?" And Robert almost smiled. Then the flu came, and the flu is where the street truly folded him in, though nobody planned that either. It swept through Linden that January the way it does, and it caught Robert hard, the deep, body-aching kind that pins a person to the bed. For 2 days he barely got up. He didn't eat. He didn't bring in his mail or his newspaper, and it was the newspaper in the end that spoke for him. Because in all his years on that street, Robert Hale had never once left a paper lying in the driveway. Nora noticed it the first morning and thought little of it. She noticed it the second morning, still there in its plastic sleeve, the porch light on in broad daylight because he'd never turned it off, and something about it made her stop with the baby on her hip and look, really look, at the quiet house next door. She sent Josh over. He knocked and knocked again, and when Robert finally came to the door, he was grey and unsteady, holding the frame. And Josh Reyes, who was a good-natured man, not given to overthinking, took one look and said, "Okay, you're sick. Sit down, I've got you." And that was that. Nora came over with soup within the hour, real soup, in a thermos, and she let herself into his kitchen the way you do for family, and found the sad plastic trays in the freezer, and the single coffee cup in the rack, and the little pile of her daughter's drawings on the windowsill. And something in her set itself, some quiet resolve, though she never said a word about it. She just left the soup and told him she'd be back at dinner, and she was. For 3 days, the Reyes family took care of Robert Hale, and they did it without any fuss, without ever once making him feel like a burden, which is the rarest and most precious skill in all of caregiving. Josh shoveled his walk and brought in his mail. Nora brought soup and then, when he could eat, a real dinner on a real plate. And she sat with him while he ate it and talked about nothing, about the neighborhood, about how Lily had decided to be a veterinarian and an astronaut. And Robert listened to the ordinary music of a family's life and felt himself thawing by degrees. And Lily herself was allowed to visit once he wasn't contagious. She marched straight into his living room and saw her drawings on his refrigerator through the kitchen doorway. She turned to him with her whole face lit up and said, "You kept them." And Robert said, "Of course I kept them," and meant it with everything he had left. That was the week the wall came down for good, though Robert couldn't have told you it was happening. You rarely can from the inside. He thought he was only letting some kind neighbors nurse him through a bad flu. He didn't know yet that a whole street had quietly decided to keep him, the way you keep something precious you found on your step. He didn't know that by summer he'd be standing at the head of a long table he had built with his own hands, laughing out loud in front of people. All he knew that week was that the soup was warm, and that the house, for the first time in a year, was not entirely silent. Sometimes that's all a turning point feels like while it's still turning. Just a warm bowl and a little less quiet than before. When he was well again, the natural thing would have been for it all to recede, for the soup to stop and the walls to go back up and the porch to go dark. But it didn't, and the reason it didn't has a name, and her name was Gloria. Gloria Pruitt lived directly across the street, a widow herself these 6 years, a broad, warm woman in her late 60s who had been quietly running the human affairs of Linden Street since before the Reyes family was born. She had known Margaret. She had brought a lasagna the week Margaret died, and had been gently rebuffed by a man too deep in the fog to answer his door, and Gloria was not a woman who took a rebuffing personally or permanently. She had simply been waiting, the way patient people wait, for a way back in. The flu and the newspaper and the young family next door had given her one. She came over the following Sunday, unannounced, with a foil pan and no intention of taking no for an answer. "Robert," she said, when he opened the door, "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what this past year's been. I knew your Margaret. She'd have my hide if she saw me letting you sit over here alone one more Sunday. I do a dinner every week, my table, 6 o'clock, and you're coming." "I'm not asking, I'm telling. Bring nothing but yourself." And she turned and walked back across the street before he could assemble a single one of the excuses that were already lining up behind his teeth. Robert stood in the doorway. Across the street, Gloria's porch light was on. So, he noticed, was his. He almost didn't go. He got as far as putting on a clean shirt and then sat down on the edge of the bed and nearly talked himself out of it. Because going meant a table full of people and their questions and their pity. And pity was the thing he could least bear. But 6 o'clock came, and some stubborn ember of the man Margaret had married made him stand up and cross the street and knock on Gloria Pruitt's door. And when it opened, the warmth and the noise and the smell of a real Sunday dinner rolled out over him. Pot roast, he realized. Someone in that house had made a pot roast, and his knees nearly went. "Now, here is the moment I most wanted to bring you to tonight. So let it land softly." Gloria's table was full. There was Gloria and her grown daughter and 2 loud grandchildren, and old Walt from the corner house, and the Ray's family, Nora and Josh and Lily, and the baby in a high chair flinging peas. And there, at the end, was one empty chair, with a place set in front of it. And Gloria steered Robert to it with a hand between his shoulder blades. He sat down at a full table for the first time since the spring Margaret died. For 50 years, he had never once eaten a good dinner alone. Then for a year, he had never once eaten one any other way. And now, here he was, in the noise and the steam and the passing of dishes. And something in his chest that had been clenched into a fist for months began, very slowly, to open its fingers. It was Walt who did the last of it, though he'd never have called it that. Walt Dorsey was Robert's own age, a widower too, a Vietnam veteran with a bad hip and a dry way of talking, and it turned out Walt's son had been in Robert's shop class 30 years before. Halfway through dinner, Walt fixed him with a look and said, "You're the shop teacher. My boy Kevin made his mother a jewelry box in your class. 1990-something. Ugliest thing you ever saw. She kept it on her dresser till the day she died." And Robert, who had not laughed in what felt like a geological age, felt something break loose in his chest. And he laughed. An actual laugh, rusty and surprised and too loud. And across the table, Gloria caught Nora's eye, and neither of them said anything. Because some victories you don't point at. After that, the street had him, and it never quite let go. Sunday dinner became a fixed star in Robert's week, and he stopped dreading it and started, to his own astonishment, looking forward to it. Walt took to walking over most mornings for coffee, and Robert found himself, for the first time in a year, making the full pot on purpose and pouring 2 cups. And the second cup wasn't a wound anymore, it was for Walt. And the 2 old men sat at the kitchen table where Margaret's chair used to sit empty, and argued about baseball and the state of the roads and whether the diner on Main had gone downhill. It had, they agreed. Everything had. They said it with the deep contentment of men who have earned the right to complain about it together. The little cracks kept letting in light. One Saturday, Robert heard, over the fence, the particular sound of a father and daughter both losing a battle with a bicycle. Josh's patient cursing and Lily's frustrated wail, and he went out and found them defeated by a wobbly training wheel and a stripped bolt. Robert looked at it for a second, and something very old woke up in his hands. "Hang on," he said. He went into his garage, and he stood for a moment in front of the workbench he had not uncovered since before Margaret got sick. A broad old bench under a bedsheet gone grey with dust. And he pulled the sheet off, and the smell of sawdust and machine oil rose up to meet him like an old friend he'd thought he'd never see again. He found the right wrench. He fixed the bike in 4 minutes. Lily watched him the whole time like he was performing surgery, and when the wheel spun true, she looked up at him and said, "You can fix things," with such pure amazement that Robert had to look away. He could fix things. He had forgotten that about himself. In all the months of not being able to fix the one thing, the only thing, that he had wanted to fix, he had forgotten that his hands still knew how to make 100 smaller things right. That afternoon he stayed out in the garage until dark, just cleaning, oiling the tools, running his thumb along the edges of chisels he'd sharpened 1,000 times. Over the next weeks, the bench came back to life. He built Lily a small bookshelf for her room, painted purple at her strict instruction. He built the baby, Theo, a set of blocks sanded so smooth they felt like river stones. He built Gloria a new mailbox post to replace the one the plow had clipped. Word got around the street, the way word does, that the quiet man in the White House could fix anything and would, and people started stopping by. And Robert Hale, who a season before could not make himself knock on a neighbor's door, found his garage becoming the place the street came to. Spring came the way it does in the Midwest, all at once after months of grey, and with it came the dog. The Reyes kids had been campaigning for a puppy since before they moved in, and Nora and Josh finally caved and brought home a scruffy brown rescue of no particular breed, all feet and ears, that Lily named Cooper before they'd even gotten him out of the car. And Cooper, in the way of dogs, took one look at the whole warm chaos of his new family and then, inexplicably, decided that the person he loved most in the world lived next door. He dug under the fence. He sat on Robert's step and cried. He was, frankly, more dog than 2 working parents with 2 small children had time for. And it was Robert, one grey dawn, unable to sleep, who finally clipped a leash on him and took him around the block just to stop the crying, and discovered that he had a reason to get up in the morning. The morning walk became Robert's and Cooper's. Every day, first light, the old man and the scruffy dog made their slow circuit of Linden Street and the 2 beyond it. And it turned out that a man walking a dog is a man the whole world will talk to. He met people he'd lived near for years and never known. He learned names again, the way Margaret used to, the young nurse on the corner who worked nights, the retired teacher 2 streets over, the kid who was always shooting baskets alone and turned out to be shy rather than sullen. Cooper was a passport back into the country of ordinary human contact, and Robert, leaning on the leash while the dog investigated a fascinating patch of grass, would sometimes stop and be almost frightened by how much lighter he felt, as if he were getting away with something, as if joy this simple couldn't possibly be allowed. I won't pretend it was all a smooth climb, because life isn't, and the truest stories keep their honest bumps. In April, David finally came, made good on his warm weather promise, flew out from Seattle for a long weekend, and the visit went sideways in a way neither of them saw coming. David arrived braced to find his father sunk in the grief he'd been hearing in the Sunday phone calls all year, and instead, he found a house with drawings all over the refrigerator, a dog he'd never heard of asleep on the couch, a neighbor named Walt letting himself in for coffee like he owned the place, and a woman from across the street dropping off a pie and calling his father Robert in a familiar way that David couldn't place. And something in David, some tender, guilty place, curdled at the sight of it. It came out wrong on the second night. "You've got all these people," David said, over the dishes, in the low, careful voice of a man trying not to start a fight and starting one anyway. "This Gloria and Walt and the family next door, they're over here all the time. I worry, Dad." You don't have to let everybody run your life just because you're lonely. You barely know these people. And Robert, drying a plate, went very still. He understood, even in the sting of it, what his son was really saying, which was, why them and not me? Why did strangers get to save you when I couldn't? Why wasn't I enough and why wasn't I here? But understanding it didn't take the sting out. I know exactly who these people are, Robert said quietly. That woman across the street knew your mother. That man Walt had a boy in my class. That little girl next door drew me a picture of my own house with the porch light on, when I'd forgotten I ever turned it on. And it was the first time in a year I remembered I was still alive. He set the plate down. You weren't here, David, and that's all right. That's how it should be. You've got your own children and your own life a long way off, and I would never ask you to give that up. But don't you come into this house that these people helped me find my way back into and tell me they're running my life. They saved it. And then he was quiet, because it was more than he'd said to his son in years, and both of them stood in the kitchen not looking at each other. David flew home 2 days later, and for a week the Sunday calls were stiff. But here is the thing about a good son, which David was. He thought about it. He thought about the drawings on the refrigerator and the dog and the pie, and slowly he understood that he had come out to rescue a drowning man and found instead a man who had been pulled to shore by the very people he'd resented for reaching him first, and that his resentment was really just the shape of his own guilt for having been too far away to reach. He called the following Sunday and said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm glad they're there. I'm glad somebody's there." And then, after a silence, "Tell me about the dog." And Robert, sitting on his own front porch in the spring evening with Cooper's chin on his shoe and the light on behind him, told his son about the dog, and something between them that had been strained came quietly back into true. The seasons turned, as they do, toward summer, and the whole street began to lean toward the 4th of July, which on Linden Street was the great event of the year. The block party, the closed-off street and the long tables and the grills going all afternoon. And that was the year Gloria Pruitt looked around at the graying committee of neighbors trying to organize it, and thought of Robert. She came over on a June evening and found him in the garage. "Robert," she said, "those long tables we set up every year, the good sturdy ones, I've been wondering for years where they came from, and Walt tells me you built them, in this very garage." Robert wiped his hands on a rag and said, "A long time ago. My wife ran the party. I just built the tables." And Gloria, who missed nothing, said, "Well, maybe this year you do both." So Robert Hale, who 8 months before had been the darkest porch on the street, found himself, in the last week of June, at the center of the 4th of July. He hauled the long folding tables out of his garage, the ones he'd built with his own hands 3 decades earlier, the ones Margaret had filled for years, and he set them up down the middle of Linden Street, with Walt supervising unhelpfully from a lawn chair, and Josh doing the actual lifting, and Lily running the exact same airplane circles her feet had learned to run the day she moved in. And when Nora asked him, gently, whether he might want to bring a dish, Robert surprised even himself. He said, "My wife made a pot roast and a casserole in a blue dish. I never learned how, but I found the recipe card in her handwriting in a drawer, and I've been practicing. I'd like to bring hers." He'd been teaching himself Margaret's recipes all spring, it turned out, alone in the kitchen in the evenings, ruining the first few and slowly getting them right. The pot roast, the casserole in the heavy blue dish, following her handwriting like a map back to her. And on the 4th of July, he carried that blue casserole dish out to the long tables he had built, and he set it down among all the other dishes of all his neighbors. It was the plainest thing on the table, and it was the thing that meant the most. Because it was Margaret, out on the street she used to fill, in the hands of the husband who had finally found his way back out of the dark house to fill it for her. The party ran long and golden, the way the best ones do. Children shrieked, sparklers hissed, someone's music drifted down the block, and Robert sat at the head of a long table he had built, with Walt on one side arguing about the potato salad, and Lily on the other side showing him a drawing she'd made of the whole street, every house with a stick-figure family out front, including, Next to the family and the dog, one tall man who was not standing alone in a doorway anymore. And as the light went blue and then grey, as the long summer dusk came down over Linden Street, Robert did the thing he'd been doing every night for months now. He got up, and he walked to his porch, and he turned on his light. And this is the image I want to leave you with, the one to carry down into sleep. Because his light came on first. It always did now, the earliest one on the block, out of the habit he'd made of it since December. And then, up and down Linden Street, as the dusk deepened and the party glowed, the other porch lights came on, one by one. Gloria's and Walt's and the Reyes families and all the rest, until the whole street was a string of warm, yellow lamps in the summer dark, the way Margaret always wanted it, the way she'd have loved to see. Nobody on Linden Street should ever have to walk up to a dark house. There wasn't a dark one on the block. And the first light, the one the others seemed to wait for, the one that led them, was the white house with the green shutters, where a man who had almost let the dark have him for good stood on his porch and watched his neighbor's lights come on, and was not alone. Here is what happened next, because I know you'll want to know. And it's the best part, the way the best part usually comes at the end. A year later, the 4th of July came around again, and by then it wasn't even a question who would run it. Robert built 2 new tables that spring, because the street had grown and the old ones weren't enough. And Cooper, who by then split his time so evenly between the 2 houses that nobody was quite sure whose dog he was, supervised the building from the cool of the garage floor. Sunday dinners had become a rotation, and once a month they were at Robert's, at the big table in the kitchen where Margaret's chair used to sit empty and now never did. Walt still came for coffee every morning. Lily, 7 now and a full inch taller, still left drawings, though she'd moved on from crayon to markers and had strong opinions about the difference. David came out twice that year, real visits, warm ones, and brought the grandchildren, and Robert taught the older one to sand a board smooth in the garage that smelled of sawdust and machine oil. And David stood in the doorway, watching his father's hands guide his son's, and had to step out into the yard for a minute, the way you do. On the phone now they talked about the dog and the street and the tables and Margaret, easily, the way they hadn't been able to for a while. David had stopped feeling like he'd failed to save his father, because he'd come to understand what took Robert 70 years and 1 terrible year to learn himself, which is that no one person is supposed to be a whole world for another, and that a life is saved not by one grand rescue, but by a street full of small ones, a plate of cookies, a shoveled walk, a drawing on a mailbox, a dog that won't stay in its own yard. And every single night, all year long, the first porch light lit on Linden Street was Robert's. He turned it on at dusk without thinking about it, the way you tend a small fire, and up and down the block the others followed, and any stranger driving through in the evening would have seen a street of warm windows with not one dark house in it, and would never have known that a year and a half before, right there in the middle, there had been a hole in the light where a good man was quietly disappearing. He didn't disappear. He came home. Not to the house, he'd never left the house. He came home to the street, and to the table, and to the morning walk, and to the ordinary blessed noise of other people's lives pressed up close against his own. He came home to being one of them. If there's a small thing to take from Robert's story as you drift off tonight, let it be this gentle one, and then let it go. The people who save us are almost never the ones we're waiting for, and they almost never do it with anything grand. They do it with a plate of cookies you're too tired to want. They do it with a crayon drawing that sees you more clearly than you can see yourself. They do it by walking across the street and saying, "I'm not asking, I'm telling. You're coming to dinner." And sometimes the whole of it, the whole coming back to life, begins with one small, stubborn act of your own, one flip of a switch in a dark kitchen, one light left on so that nobody, not even you, has to walk up to a dark house ever again. So if there's a quiet neighbor on your street, the one whose porch stays dark, the one who doesn't wave, think of Robert tonight. And maybe tomorrow, in no hurry, you knock. And if you've been the one behind the dark window lately, if this landed a little close, then let Robert keep you company down into sleep. And know that the light can come back on. That it comes back on for the least likely houses, and that somewhere out there a street is warmer for your window being lit. Rest now. Let your shoulders drop, let the day go all the way, and I'll see you in the next one. Sleep well. Before you go, if this story kept you company tonight, it would mean a great deal if you'd tap the like button and subscribe, so the quiet stories keep finding you when you need them. And I'd love to hear from you, softly, in the comments before you sleep. Tell me this, who was the person who once folded you back into the world when you'd started to disappear from it? The Gloria, or the Lily, or the Walt in your own story? And did you ever get to thank them? And while you're there, I'm always curious what corner of the country you're all drifting off from tonight. So leave your state and your age if you'd like. Now close your eyes. The light's on. Good night.